Welcome to a new episode of InFocus with Ejaz Haider. Not surprisingly, I'm again going to discuss the illegal armed aggression against the Islamic Republic of Iran by the Zionist entity and the United States. But first, a word about this program. It is supported by the Center for Security Strategy and Policy Research, which is an autonomous policy research center housed in the University of Lahore, and it tackles issues that impact contemporary security and strategic developments. This program is part of that effort. So the last four programs have been about Iran and the US Zionist designs in the run-up to and after the war broke out. We have talked a lot about why the war began, how Iran has responded through mosaic defense, how the war started by Hamas and the Zionist response worked in many ways to force Iran's hand in ways that violated some basic principles of Iran's forward defense strategy, or what is also called the long hand strategy. So there are hundreds of analyses and reports out there since the war began, and they describe what's happening, how Iran has fared, and why it hasn't collapsed, which incidentally was Trump's original assumption, despite successful decapitation and degradation strikes against it. So I don't want to focus on what has and is being debated. Instead, I want to discuss where this goes from here. So we have Donald Trump's speech and the subsequent escalation. The speech failed to answer central questions, but that shouldn't be surprising. That's just Trump, boastful, ignorant, incoherent, and contradictory. In the middle of all this, Foreign Affairs has published an essay today, and this is 3rd April that we're recording this program, by Iran's former foreign minister and vice president, Javad Zarif, titled How Iran Should End the War, a Deal Tehran Could Take. Mr. Zarif's central argument is that since Iran is winning, Tehran should use its upper hand not to keep fighting, but to declare victory and make a deal that both ends this conflict and prevents the next one. The other issue I want to discuss is the future of the Gulf itself. Could there be a strategic reset? We know that it's not going to be business as usual. But what possibly could that strategic reset be? In other words, what would be its nature? Would it include Iran or exclude it? Could the GCC, which came into being because of the perceived threat from Iran, survive this war? Mr. Zarif, in that article that I've talked about, Foreign Affairs article, argues that Bahrain, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Yemen, together with permanent members of the Security Council and possibly Egypt, Pakistan, and Turkey, should begin cooperating on a regional security network, to ensure non-aggression, cooperation, and freedom of navigation throughout West Asia. That includes establishing formal arrangements between Iran and Oman for the continuous safe passage of ships through the Strait of Hormuz. To discuss all this, I have with me Dr. Ali Vaez. His CV is long and impressive, so I'll keep it short. Dr. Vaez is International Crisis Group's Iran Project Director and Senior Advisor to the President. He led Crisis Group's efforts in helping to bridge the gaps between Iran and the P5+1 that led to the landmark 2015 nuclear deal, JCPOA. Previously, he served as a senior political affairs officer at the United Nations Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs and was the Iran project director at the Foundation of American Scientists. He's an adjunct professor at Georgetown University's Edmund Walsh School of Foreign Service and a fellow at the Foreign Policy Institute of the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. He's also a co-author of How Sanctions Work, Iran and the Impact of Economic Warfare, which incidentally is a fantastic book. I learned a lot from it. He has written widely on Iranian affairs and is a regular contributor to mainstream media outlets. So, Ali, thank you so much for being with me. It's great.
Thank you for having me.
So let's try and figure out, and I know, extrapolating from current trend lines into the future is always a dicey exercise, but, that's our bread and butter, frankly. We try to do that. hope that what we're predicting actually comes to pass. And sometimes we actually think that, oh, we wish that it hadn't when it deals with tragedies. But nonetheless, this idea of escalating to de-escalate, following Trump's nationally televised speech, what is he trying to do? I mean, up until now, it's been a month, and it should be obvious to even the blind that Iran is not going to de-escalate. If there is an escalation, it will have an escalatory response. So what exactly is Trump trying to achieve here? I'm not talking about Netanyahu. We'll come to that. Because from where I stand, I believe that the Zionists have a completely different objective. But what is Trump trying to do?
It's a very good question, Ejaz, and it's a very hard exercise to put yourself in the mind of President Trump and try to figure out what is it that exactly he wants to do. Of course, is predictably unpredictable, but one can appreciate the dilemma that he's facing now. I think he went into this war based on the misguided assumption that the Iranian regime was so weak that with the massive shock and awe of the opening act of this conflict and with political decapitation of the system, it would quickly surrender to US terms. And you could see in the reporting that came out of the early days of the war that he was told by CENTCOM that there is a risk that Iran would close the Strait of Hormuz, and he had dismissed that risk by saying that Iran would capitulate before they get a chance to close the strait, which again demonstrates the kind of Pollyannish assumptions with which he entered into this war. Now, into the second month of the war, he's stuck because he can't get a deal with Iran. That would require making major concessions to the Islamic Republic that he's very reluctant to do. He can't get out of the war because the strait would remain closed, and that would be humiliating. And Iran might continue firing at Israel, and that also means that the U.S. would be pulled back in because even if it's not engaged in offensive operations against Iran, it would have to engage in defensive operations to defend Israel. And all options for escalation also come with very high costs and risks. So this is where he is now. I think from what we have heard, and I would actually pay more attention to what he's doing rather than what he's saying by sending so many ground troops to the region. It appears to me that he wants some sort of a master stroke that would allow him to frame this whole campaign as a victory and then walk out of it. Now, what that would be exactly is anybody's guess. I remember talking to a lot of experts on Venezuela in the run-up to January 3rd kidnapping of Maduro. And almost none of them predicted that this would be the kind of operation that the U.S. would engage in. So, what exactly that is, whether it's seizing the stockpile of highly enriched uranium in Iran, whether it's disabling maybe some of Iranian offshore oil wells, maybe it's taking over an island, maybe it's some other sort of special force operation deep inside the Iranian territory. We don't know, but that is, I think, what appears the most attractive kind of option to him because he truly believes in the might of U.S. military being able to deliver on these kind of precision operations, regardless of the outcome. Because again, if you look at Venezuela, it's not a clear and clean victory, but that's the way he likes to frame the outcomes of military operations and then cut his losses and walk away. That seems to be his plan. Whether it would work or not is anybody's guess.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think that Netanyahu sold this to him. First at Mar-a-Lago and last December when he met him, and then February, about which there is now a lot of reporting from the New York Times, Post, Wall Street Journal. where they had basically planned this by them. The deep and I would say sweet irony is that the Gulf allies had absolutely no idea that they had already set the ball rolling and that they will do this. But I agree with your assessment. But here's the thing: on multiple occasions, Trump himself and his tattooed Secretary of Defense, who likes to call himself Secretary of War, they have actually declared victory in some ways. Oh, the Iranian Navy is gone, the Iranian leadership is gone, the Iranian infrastructure is gone, the Iranian this is gone, and that is gone. And, after that kind of rhetoric, you could have said that now is the time for us to walk back. But they haven't done that. Now, in the event of a shallow ground incursion, whatever it takes, given Iran's formidable topography, given Iran's history of dealing with an invader by luring him in and then finishing him off, it seems to me that this is going to be Operation Eagle Claw at a much bigger scale. And if he's going to put those Marines or the 82nd Airborne troops on Kharg or, Abu Musa or whatever islands, he will be putting them in a fishbowl for Iran's target practice. It doesn't make any sense from a military perspective or operational perspective. And if you look at it from a political perspective, in trying to gain some kind of, as you mentioned rightly, some kind of something that he can sort of wave as victory, he's not going to get that. As a matter of fact, it's going to get worse.
Yeah, well, but that's our assessment. It's not necessarily President Trump's assessment, right? We could have said from the beginning of this war that, even if you look at the expenditure that the U.S. has had to make in this conflict, both on the offensive side and the defensive side, with 1/10 of this expenditure as an incentive to Iran, he would have been able to get a much more favorable deal. But he opted for this path, which is, from the beginning was clear that it was not going to deliver the intended results. So the fact that the military options are all risky and could end in grief, I don't think necessarily would deter him from going down that road. Um, the main question, I think, remains, and in his head, if you look at his behavior when it gets to Iran from his first term in office, there's a consistent pattern. In the first term, the hardliners around him, the likes of Mike Pompeo and John Bolton, were telling him Iran would buckle under a tremendous amount of pressure. So, at that time, they used coercive economic pressure by reimposing sanctions and doubling down on those. I mean, the sanctions that were lifted by the 2015 nuclear deal were about 750 designations. By the end of the Trump administration, there were about 1,500 designations that were in place. And yet Iran was not giving up. In his second term, he was told military coercion will deliver the intended result. So he did the Midnight Hammer operation last year, bombing Iran for 45 minutes only, hoping that that would result in Iranian capitulation. It didn't. And now, 4 to 5 weeks of military operations against Iran still hasn't produced that result. The problem with the president's approach and the fact that he's kind of caught in this escalation trap is that he constantly believes a little bit more of pressure, whether it's military or economic, would magically deliver the intended result. And when it doesn't, he gets frustrated and he doubles down. Unfortunately, in the case of Iran, this has been the case. I mean, look at the type of targets that he is going after right now, and he's bragging about
Yeah.
attacking infrastructure, which is a war crime. But this is not an act of a superpower but posed in dignity that knows that it can achieve its results. It's an act of desperation, honestly. And this is why I don't think we can really consider what the US does from this point on based on rationality. It is going to be very emotional and it's going to be driven by rage and anger. And therefore, it is very dangerous.
Absolutely. I mean, the White House website has the speech that he made. They have a transcript of that. And Revolutionary Guard Corps, Core is spelled Core. So I tweeted saying that, White House needs an editor and most probably a president also. So, so the thing is, you're right. I mean, this is our analysis, but here's the thing. I obviously occupational hazard. I will watch these U.S. channels, and over the last 3 weeks, there have been a number of former military officers, 4 stars, 3 stars, 2 stars, coming on these channels. And one of the questions that was asked, most of them, was about the Strait of Hormuz, about Iran's effective blocking of it. So the anchors were asking these questions about, did the United States never think or plan about whether Iran would do that? And to the last person, they said, well, this is one of the foremost things in CENTCOM planning. So then the question really is, if that is, and I think they're absolutely right, because even a subaltern, a half decent subaltern, would actually realize that that's one of the central things to do. It seems to me that the war has been waged against professional advice and for completely political or politico ideological reasons. Is that your assessment too?
I do believe that that's the case. I mean, there are consequences when you remove the professionals, when you remove the process for policymaking, right? Professionals, I mean, just look at the number of 3 star and 4 star generals that this administration fired at the beginning of its term. Look at the way that even they intimidated members of the military by calling them all to a big meeting in Washington last year, and even humiliating those who were overweight
Yeah, fat admirals, fat generals. That's how Hexet put it.
exactly. And even right now, a Secretary of Army has been fired, most likely because there are disagreements about the utility of putting boots on the ground. So it's first of all an administration that has demonstrated that is not open to professional advice. Then it has also destroyed the policymaking process, which would actually take all of these risks into consideration. When you don't have anyone with expertise on Iran at the State Department or
Yeah,
at the National Security Council, most of these people have been laid off, have been fired, have been sidelined, have been silenced. And then there is another element, which is politicization of intelligence, right? I mean, we saw after the Midnight Hammer operation when the Defense Intelligence Agency came out and said, at best, we have delayed Iran's nuclear program by 6 months,
yeah,
which was in contradiction to what the president had said, which was that he had obliterated Iran's nuclear program. He fired the head of DIA. That means that other agencies would not dare telling you the truth because they know that then their jobs would be on the line. So you put all of these things together, then you see how a foreign actor like Israel can have so much more influence in shaping the thinking of the US administration because there is really not much that can counterbalance and check on that influence. And I think this is one of the reasons that the U.S. ended up committing these mistakes. Now, of course, the U.S. can afford committing mistakes. It can always recover from these mistakes. Yes, it would again come at a cost, especially in a world where we have great power competition. But some of these events, Ejaz, as you well know, also have a very long tail.
Yeah,
If you look at the 1953 coup in Iran, you could say, well, that was a success. The outcome was exactly what the UK and the US wanted. But the long tail of that was the 1979 revolution, was the US embassy hostage crisis, and everything else that has ensued since then, and so on and so forth. I mean, like what is happening now in terms of civilian casualties in Iran, the damage to the infrastructure, this is going to generate so much hatred, so much anger within the Iranian society that it is going to show itself one way or another at the regional level, at an international level. This is how radicalization is created. This is how ideological enmity is fed. But again, we have an administration that doesn't think in those terms, and this is one of the disconnects that we have in this conflict. For President Trump, this is a stumbling block in the road towards the November midterm elections. For Iran, this is the battle of the century. This is an existential battle for its survival.
absolutely. Absolutely. And you talked about the long tail, which is why I've always felt that, this French concept of longue durée, that's something in terms of looking at history and then, looking into the future is so important. But Ali, you have had a long career in diplomacy, in facilitation talks. And since you were there for the P5+1 also, I'm sure you worked closely with Dr. Zarif also. What do you think of his Foreign Affairs article, and what exactly do you think he means when he says that since Iran is winning, Iran should declare victory and think about some kind of deal?
So first of all, let me say that I think it's a courageous thing for him to do under the current circumstances, because the general mood in among the political elite in Iran is not at all towards compromise. They believe that they have the upper hand, and that if they double down, they would be able to come out of this, if not victorious, but at least in a position to be able to extract serious concessions from the United States. So what Zarif is saying is, that the same kind of hubris that led President Trump into committing this mistake is something that the Iranians are now also susceptible to overplay their hand. So he's basically saying that now that you have the upper hand, use it to try to end this war in a comprehensive manner. However, I don't know how much at this moment he has influence within the system, because, as you know, he was sidelined about a year into President Pezeshkian's term. And the current cast of characters who are in control of the political system in Iran, who are much more hardline than their predecessors, as you well know. Um, I'm not sure are open to that kind of advice. But what he is saying does make logical sense for Iran to try to end this before the damage is just so deep that recovering from it is going to be extremely difficult for the country. And it's also, there is a counter argument that I think those in Iran who are not yet ready for diplomacy should consider, which is that when Israel targets everyone in Iran who could play an important role in a diplomatic breakthrough, whether it's the National Security Advisor Ali Larijani or former Foreign Minister Kamal Kharazi, this means that Israel is also not interested in a diplomatic solution. And so, if you do what Israel wants, it's probably not necessarily in your national interest. But again, Iranian hardliners, they also don't red team, and they think in a bubble, and therefore they're prone to making mistakes. Let's remember that some of these people who are in charge right now, like the commander of the Revolutionary Guards, General Vahidi, like the new National Security Advisor, General Zolghat, like the Speaker of Parliament, Ghalibaf, was also the commander of the Revolutionary Guards Air Force. They were all in the Iran-Iraq War, and in the Iran-Iraq War, Iran basically managed to recapture the territory that was invaded by Saddam Hussein in the first 2 years of the war. But these people prolonged the conflict for another 6 bloody, traumatizing years in
Yeah.
the search for a better deal, in the search for the upper hand.
Yeah.
And therefore, I'm afraid that they are susceptible to committing that mistake again, which would cost Iran very dearly. Some of the things in Zarif's proposal, I'll end with this, are a little bit too ambitious. I don't think that given the track record that we have seen with the Trump administration, you can really imagine that they have the discipline, the focus, the creativity to be able to engage in serious diplomacy that is required to settle these things in a sustainable manner. But nevertheless, there is no doubt that there is now an opportunity for diplomacy which could be squandered, and therefore his ideas, I think, are important contribution.
I perfectly understand what you're saying, but there are a couple of things which I won't flag, and this is without prejudice to your analysis, which I think is very apt. Structurally, when there has been an aggression against Iran, and also the point that you mentioned with reference to the Zionists, uh, I mean, their war against Iran covertly has been going on for the past 40 years. How does Iran find the space, structurally speaking, when it is not the aggressor, it is the defender, and when there is no de escalation or any indication of de escalation from the other side, to declare victory and say, okay, we want to have a deal? I mean, considering that that's going to basically make Iran look weak.
Well, look, I think the definition of victory for the Iranian side is actually much more clear cut than is the case for the United States or even Israel, which is survival. This is a system that has survived in the face of aggression by two nuclear weapon states, by the biggest military in the world and the biggest military in the region. That is good enough. Now, of course, you have to then translate that into some sort of a sustainable solution and be able to make some gains out of it as well. This is why, in order to translate what Iran has been able to gain by resisting this act of aggression, would require, I think, two things. One is to be able to secure some sort of meaningful concession from the United States. And then two is to be able to get that through a mediator, because the Iranians, as a matter of principle, are not going to talk to the United States as long as the bombing continues. And this is where the role of a country like Pakistan could be so important. From what I have seen so far, Ejaz, in terms of diplomatic proposals, the statement that came out of the meeting between your foreign minister and the Chinese foreign minister, and also some of the proposals that other regional mediators have put on the table, Egypt, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia, I'm afraid diplomacy is moving in the wrong direction, because we are not yet, and here I'm drawing both on Zarif's article and on some of these ideas that have been circulating. We're not yet at a point that we can get into some sort of a very detailed, comprehensive solution that would resolve everything at once.
Yeah.
What is needed at this point is, number one, to put guardrails around this conflict, which is starting to spin out of control. If there is ground invasion, this would become exponentially more difficult to solve. If there is
Correct.
more targeting on infrastructure, including energy infrastructure, we might have a global economic meltdown. So this can still get way worse than what it is right now. So putting a ceiling on escalation level and excluding civilian infrastructure, I think, is the first step. Along with that, you could consider some sort of a very limited, narrow solution along the lines of the Black Sea Grain Initiative that was negotiated by Turkey and the United Nations in 2022, allowing fertilizer and food to pass through Bosphorus despite the ongoing conflict between Ukraine and Russia. You could do something similar now in the Strait. The UN has appointed a special envoy. This is something that, especially in a scenario that the United States allows Iran to collect a transit fee, and maybe even Oman to do the same on behalf of the GCC, and all of this could be part of a fund for the region's recovery from this conflict. So it's not extortion by anyone, it is basically reparation for what has happened to this region. Then you have the beginnings of some sort of a mutually beneficial arrangement, meaning that the United States has recognized that the Islamic Republic is there to stay. It has recognized that it has to be able to benefit from any kind of agreement. And it has recognized that the escalation has to be controlled and contained and maybe potentially even scaled back. From there, then you can get into more detailed solutions about the nuclear issue or about other areas of disagreement. But that is the way to start. And I'm afraid if we go for much more loftier, ambitious ideas, this is just going to get dragged on.
I couldn't agree more with you. I think you have put it beautifully because I think the guardrails, you go step by step. And I also completely agree with you. I mean, Clausewitz was very clear that the commander's excellence inheres in his very clear understanding of the culmination point of victory. And I think your example of the Iran Iraq war, after Iran had recovered its territory, is very apt because after that, the 6 further bloody years were essentially Iran trying to take Iraqi territory and Iraq then retaliating with chemical weapons and the rest of it, and the collusion with the Kurds and all of that, and the rest, as they say, history. So yeah, so it dragged on for another 6 years, which probably it should have not gone on for that long. But I think the 5 points that uh, Pakistan and China put out, point number 4, when I was reading the statement, point number 4 is very significant in terms of 2 points. One is that it talks about civilian and commercial shipping, which is kind of excluding the naval military ships, and that has some kind of impact on the U.S. Navy, which has been sailing through the Strait of Hormuz and transiting, at free will, has its Fifth Fleet headquarters in Manama. So it's significant that it excludes military ships. And secondly, about a toll, which is kind of a middle road uh, between the current Iranian position and the U.S. position, that there should be free shipping, free, under the UN Convention on the Law of Sea, and the Iranian position that only friendly states vessels can sail through. So there is this in between position that has been taken in point 4 of the 5 point statement that was put out by Pakistan and China. But finally, let's talk about the Gulf. As I said in my opening, it's not going to be business as usual. It is very clear now that the Gulf's model of security has proven to be flawed. Flawed also was the sense that they could rely on an extra regional power to basically provide security against perceived threats from Iran. That's not happened. The bases have actually been the albatross around their necks. What we have also seen is, given the conversation that's happening, that the GCC is kind of divided in three ways. I mean, you've got Qatar and Oman, which are having a different kind of conversation, more empathy towards Iran, more understanding of what has happened. You have UAE and Bahrain, already part of Abraham Accords. I mean, they've gone a distance on that road to being the Zionist friends. And then you have Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, which kind of hanging in there. Do you think that GCC could survive this? This conversation, this post-war conversation, and the idea of how to develop a collective security architecture?
Survive, yes, but finding a united position will be very difficult. There's always been differences within the GCC from the beginning about Iran, and that has continued over the years. And some of the positions are pretty consistent with where they have been in the past few decades. You have had Oman, who facilitated the nuclear diplomacy between Iran and the US, and has been the mediator for many years, including until right in the run up to this conflict. Qatar, again, quite similar position. And then you have the Saudis now kind of in between with Kuwait. And then you have the UAE and Bahrain to the other end of the spectrum, seeking Iran, an Iran that is defanged, regardless of what that really means. But I think the bigger question for the Gulf is, what are they going? How are they going to position themselves in the aftermath of this war in terms of alliances? Because in the run up to this war, they thought by hedging their bets, by having relatively good relations with Iran, some of them established relations with Israel, but also in the great power competition, try to hedge their bets as well. Obviously, very close to the US, but also lots of connections with China and Russia, that they would be able to survive through multi alignment, basically. That model clearly has not worked. I think after this war, probably from a security perspective, despite the fact that it is the alliance with the United States that exposed them to this disastrous situation, they have nowhere else to go. I don't see them being able to turn their back to the United States. Their entire defensive infrastructure is U.S. made, and therefore they are bound to remain in the United States camp. Um, what they would do then next about Iran would determine also their place in with regards to the great power competition. Because if they remain divided, then it would be, I would say, business as usual in the sense that Iran would have good relations with some of them and bad relations with some of them. And that kind of divide and conquer is not unusual and unfamiliar to the Iranians. They can deal with it. The Gulf can deal with it as well. But if they decide that they're going to be much more hostile, especially if countries like the UAE and Bahrain would decide that they are going to go into some sort of a Israeli-U.S. alliance system against Iran, this could really further fragment the Gulf states as well, because I don't think countries like Qatar or Oman would go along with this.
Yeah,
Even the
yeah.
Saudis would be very uncomfortable with it. I mean, the Saudis are part of this regional mediator network that we were talking about. We're trying to actually find a mutually beneficial solution to the current conflict. So that would create more fragmentation within the GCC. But then, again, depending on how this war ends and whether there is a mutually beneficial solution or not, I also do believe that Russia and China's views about their bets on both sides of the Gulf could start to shift. because in some ways you can argue that the same view that the Europeans or the West has about Ukraine now, looking at it as a bulwark against a historic adversary, this much weaker country who could stood its ground and basically serve as a shield against Russia and protect the European states. Maybe Iran could play the same role for China or for Russia with regards to the United States. And if that's the case, and if they conclude that at the end of the day, the GCC is really truly American territory, then I'm afraid that the Gulf could become the battleground of the great power competition. And that would actually be very destabilizing because, the business model of a place like Dubai or Doha could easily get disrupted with one or two drones that would hit an airport every other month. This is a very fragile setup, and this is why I am hoping that cooler heads would prevail. That after this war, the Gulf countries would conclude that time has come finally for some sort of a inclusive regional security architecture in this region, not zero sum approaches, and that they would actually bridge the gulf between them rather than deepening it, because otherwise it's going to end in grief for everyone.
No, absolutely. I completely agree with you. As a matter of fact, this is what I've written because, in some ways, this is akin to, if you look at the Gulf here vis-a-vis Iran, and if you look at the Western Europe vis-a-vis Russia, post-war, and it could have been pre-war also, frankly, and possibly there would not have been this Russo-Ukraine war. To how do you look at Russia? I mean, you want to exclude it. You want to actually assume that it is the adversary, and therefore end up with a self-fulfilling prophecy, or you want to bring Russia into a collective security architecture for Europe, which gets Russia inside the tent rather than and so almost the same kind of thing reference the Gulfies, whether they want to continue to look at Iran as hostile and an adversary and keep it outside the tent, and then end up constantly having this problem because technically the UAE or Bahrain can always say, okay, we already have Abraham Accords with the Zionists, so and we want to be in the US camp. But given this war, they will then have to say goodbye to diversification of the economy and their business model and investment coming in and investment going out, because that's not going to happen. You can't square these two things. So I believe that perhaps this, and then of course there's the conversation coming out of Dubai also, because very well that Dubai, Ras Al Khaimah, Sharjah have had a different view of relations with Iran. As a matter of fact, Abu Dhabi was not particularly pleased with how smuggling goes on between Dubai and Iran, and there are a number of influential Dubai families, Arab families that are of Iranian origin. So Dubai has had a different kind of perspective on Iran. But final word, um, you think the next couple of weeks are going to be terrible, uh, considering that there are no guardrails and it doesn't appear that there are likely to be any guardrails, and therefore Iran also escalating, and then this whole thing kind of going up in flames. Is that what we're looking at now? I mean, I know I'm asking you to do a tough thing because no one can look into the future perfectly, but it seems to me that it's gonna get worse before it gets any better.
No, I agree with that assessment. I do think that it is much likelier that it would escalate more in the coming days and weeks, with again that aim of trying to demonstrate with more proof that Iran's military capabilities have been degraded. Even CNN had reported yesterday that U.S. military assessment is that about 50% of Iran's launchers, missile launchers, are still intact. 6 weeks into this war. So they have to be able to demonstrate that they have achieved more. My concern is that, again, in this process, because Israel is now going after infrastructure, the risk is not necessarily a linear escalation, but some sort of an exponential escalation that could really spiral out of control. And so, yes, escalation is around the corner and is the likeliest scenario, but it might not, be as controllable as Washington hopes. And
Absolutely.
especially again, if President Trump, succumbs to that temptation of some sort of a masterstroke, then again, this might become so much more complicated to solve. And that is why, if Pakistan or other mediators really want to be effective, they should not wait. Now is the moment. And the moment cannot, again, happen with any kind of high level, theatrical diplomacy or a ambitious deal that would resolve everything at once. Even the longest journey will have to start with a small step. And that small step already, I think the formula is there, it's doable, and I really hope that everybody would pursue it.
No, absolutely. I can tell you one thing from my sources here that Pakistan is, feverishly trying to get some kind of something out of this. I mean, Turkey and Pakistan's proposal for the Strait of Hormuz, which Iran had accepted, Iran was in the loop. It was taken to DC as the concept of operations. And the same night, the Zionists basically bombed the two nuclear facilities and the steel plant, and everything went up in smoke. So the problem is that a lot of diplomatic effort is going into this, but then the moment you seem to get close to the finish line in some way, that's when the Israelis act. So from their perspective, as I said earlier also, their objectives are completely different from that of the United States. And I don't know at what point the US will realize this. Well, but lots of analysts have realized that, but more appropriately, at what time this administration will realize this and say enough is enough. But thank you so much, Dr. Ali Vaez. It's great to have you and your insights. This is all from this episode. If you like the discussion, click on the subscribe button and send us comments. Until our next episode, goodbye and stay safe.